Welcome to our channel.
The Lantern Cove Cipher, a Jessica Fletcher detective story. Chapter 1. The Letter That Shouldn't Exist. Jessica Fletcher had received many unusual letters over the years, fan mail, pleas for help, even the occasional veiled threat. But the envelope resting on her breakfast table that morning in Cabot Cove felt different. It had no return address. The paper was thick, almost antique, and sealed with dark blue wax, stamped with an unfamiliar crest, a lighthouse encircled by waves. Jessica adjusted her glasses, her curiosity already piqued. "Now what have we here?" she murmured, carefully opening it with her letter opener. Inside was a single sheet of parchment. The handwriting was elegant, but urgent. "Mrs. Fletcher, if you are reading this, I am already dead. Lantern Cove holds a secret buried for 40 years. Trust no one. The truth is hidden in the light. E.H." Jessica leaned back in her chair, the words settling heavily in her mind. Lantern Cove. She had heard of it, a small coastal town several hours south, known for its towering lighthouse and stubborn isolation. "If I am already dead," she repeated quietly. Her instincts stirred. Whoever had written this had expected something to happen. And more importantly, they had chosen her. That meant they knew her reputation. Jessica folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. A mystery wrapped in a warning. She couldn't ignore that. By mid-afternoon, she had packed a small suitcase and arranged for her friend to keep an eye on the house. As she drove out of Cabot Cove, the sky stretched grey and heavy above the coastline, as if anticipating trouble. Lantern Cove greeted her with silence. The town was smaller than she expected. Weathered buildings, narrow streets, and a harbour filled with fishing boats that rocked gently in the tide. At its edge stood the lighthouse, tall and stoic, its white paint chipped by years of salt and wind. Jessica parked near a modest inn and stepped out, inhaling the sharp ocean air. Something about the place felt watchful. Inside the inn, a middle-aged woman at the desk looked up with a polite but guarded smile. "Checking in?" "Yes," Jessica replied. "Jessica Fletcher. I called earlier." The woman nodded, handing over a key. "Room 3. We don't get many visitors this time of year." "I imagine not," Jessica said lightly. "Quiet towns often have the most interesting histories." The woman's smile faltered just slightly. "We prefer to keep things simple here." Jessica noted the response but said nothing. She had learned long ago that small towns often hid their secrets behind politeness. After settling into her room, she wasted no time. The letter burned in her thoughts. E.H. Who were they? And why did they believe they were going to die? Her first stop was the local newspaper office, a small building with a faded sign reading Lantern Cove Gazette. Inside, the air smelled of ink and old paper. A young man sat behind a cluttered desk, typing lazily. "Excuse me," Jessica said. He looked up, surprised. "Oh, hello. Can I help you?" "I'm hoping you can," she replied. "I'm looking for information on someone with the initials E.H., perhaps recently deceased." The young man hesitated. "You're not from around here, are you?" "No," Jessica said calmly, "but I have reason to believe this may be important." He leaned back in his chair, considering her. "There was someone," he admitted. "Eleanor Harrow, lived out by the lighthouse, kept to herself mostly." Jessica felt a quiet jolt. "Was," she repeated. He nodded. "She died 2 days ago, fell from the cliffs." Jessica's grip tightened slightly on her handbag. "An accident?" she asked. The young man shrugged. "That's what they're calling it." Jessica gave a small, thoughtful nod. "I see." But as she stepped back out into the cool coastal air, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Eleanor Harrow had not written that letter expecting to fall. Chapter 2. Shadows by the Lighthouse. The narrow trail leading to the lighthouse clung to the edge of the cliffs like a reluctant memory. Jessica Fletcher moved carefully along the uneven path, her shoes brushing against loose gravel that occasionally slipped toward the roaring sea below. The ocean stretched endlessly, its grey surface broken by jagged rocks and restless waves that crashed with a steady, thunderous rhythm. She kept replaying the letter in her mind. If you are reading this, I'm already dead. It wasn't melodrama, it was certainty. Ahead, the lighthouse stood tall against the dimming sky, its pale exterior worn by decades of wind and salt. The lantern room at the top was dark now, but even unlit, it seemed to watch over the town like a silent guardian, or perhaps a silent witness. Near its base stood a small, weather-beaten cottage. A thin column of smoke curled lazily from its chimney, suggesting recent occupancy. Jessica slowed as she approached, her instincts sharpening. Before she could call out, the cottage door opened. A man stepped outside, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. He was broad-shouldered, his face marked by years of harsh coastal weather. His eyes fixed on Jessica immediately, wary and unwelcoming. "You're not from around here," he said, his tone more statement than question. "No," Jessica replied evenly, stopping a few steps away. "But I believe you may be able to help me." "That depends on what you're looking for." "I'm looking for answers about Eleanor Harrow." The name seemed to strike him like a sudden gust of wind. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You won't find any," he said curtly. "She's gone." Jessica studied him carefully. His response was quick, too quick. "I understand she died recently," Jessica said, "but I have reason to believe her death may not have been accidental." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "People fall," he replied. "Cliffs don't forgive mistakes." Jessica reached into her handbag and removed the letter, unfolding it with calm precision. "She sent this before she died." The man hesitated, then stepped closer despite himself. His eyes scanned the page, and this time the reaction was unmistakable. Recognition, then tension, and beneath it, something dangerously close to fear. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, his voice low. "It was mailed to me," Jessica said, which suggests she expected something to happen and wanted someone outside Lantern Cove to know. The man looked past her toward the horizon, as though weighing something internally. "You should leave," he said finally. "This isn't your concern." Jessica didn't move. "When someone predicts their own death," she said calmly, "it becomes everyone's concern." The wind picked up, tugging at her coat and carrying the sharp scent of salt through the air. The man exhaled slowly, then extended his hand. "Daniel Pierce." Jessica shook it. "Jessica Fletcher." His grip was firm, though reluctant. "I used to help Eleanor maintain the lighthouse," Daniel said. "Repairs, supplies, things like that." "Used to?" Jessica asked. He nodded. "She became withdrawn in recent months. Paranoid, maybe. Started locking things up, hiding documents. Said people were asking too many questions." Jessica's interest deepened. "What kind of questions?" "About the lighthouse, about the past." Jessica glanced up at the towering structure. "What happened here?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's the problem," he said. "No one agrees on that anymore." Jessica frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "There was an incident," he said slowly. 40 years ago. Something official, something buried. The records don't match the stories. Eleanor believed there was a cover-up." Jessica felt the pieces beginning to align. "And she was investigating it?" "Obsessing over it," Daniel corrected. "She spent nights up there, going through old logs, charts, anything she could find. Said the lighthouse wasn't just guiding ships, it was hiding something." Jessica's gaze sharpened. "The truth is hidden in the light," she murmured. Daniel looked at her sharply. "That's exactly what she used to say." Before Jessica could respond, a sudden metallic clang echoed from inside the lighthouse. Both of them froze. The sound wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the cliffs, it carried clearly. Jessica turned toward the heavy wooden door at the lighthouse entrance. "Is someone inside?" she asked quietly. Daniel's expression hardened instantly. No one should be. Another sound followed, this time unmistakable. Footsteps, slow, measured, moving somewhere above them. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine, though she kept her composure. Daniel moved first, striding toward the door with urgency. Jessica followed close behind. He pushed it open, and it groaned loudly on its hinges, revealing a dim interior lit only by the faint light filtering through narrow windows. A spiral staircase wound upward, disappearing into shadow. The air inside was colder, carrying a faint scent of oil and rust. They stood at the threshold, listening. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a creak, a step. Someone was definitely inside. Daniel lowered his voice. "Stay close." Jessica nodded. Together, they stepped inside. The door swung shut behind them with a heavy thud that echoed through the tower. Above them, the footsteps stopped. Silence fell, thick and unnatural. Jessica looked up into the darkness of the staircase, her mind already racing ahead. Whoever was up there knew they weren't alone, and whatever Eleanor Harrow had discovered, someone was willing to return for it. Chapter 3. The Keeper's Secret. The silence inside the lighthouse pressed in like a living thing. Jessica Fletcher stood still for a moment after the door shut behind them, allowing her senses to adjust. The dim light filtering through the narrow windows barely reached the base of the spiral staircase. Above, shadows coiled tightly around each step, swallowing everything beyond a few feet. Daniel Pierce raised a hand, signaling caution. "Whoever's up there," he whispered, "they heard us come in." Jessica nodded, her gaze fixed upward, which means they've stopped moving on purpose. A faint draft slipped down the stairwell, carrying with it the scent of dust and something else. Oil, recently used. Daniel seemed to notice it too. "The lantern hasn't been in operation for weeks," he murmured. "Not since Eleanor." He trailed off, then shook his head. "Someone's been up there." Jessica placed a hand lightly on the railing. "Then we better find out who." They began their ascent slowly, each step creaking under their weight. The spiral design forced them close to the center, limiting visibility. Jessica kept one hand near the wall, steadying herself as they climbed higher into the dimness. Halfway up, Daniel stopped abruptly. Jessica nearly bumped into him. "What is it?" He pointed toward the edge of one of the steps. A smear, dark and irregular. Jessica leaned closer, her breath catching slightly. "Grease," she said. "Fresh." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Someone came through here recently, maybe minutes ago." They continued upward, now more alert than ever. The air grew colder as they climbed, and the faint metallic smell intensified. At last, they reached a narrow landing where a wooden door stood slightly ajar. Daniel pushed it open cautiously. Inside was a small room, Eleanor Harrow's workspace. A desk stood near the window, covered in scattered papers. Shelves lined the walls, filled with journals, maps, and old maritime logs. A single chair lay tipped over on its side. Jessica stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning every detail. "This wasn't left like this," she said. "Someone's been searching." Daniel moved toward the desk, lifting a loose sheet of paper. She kept everything organized, always. Jessica approached the shelves, running her fingers lightly along the spines of the journals. Several were missing. "Not random," she observed, "targeted." A sudden gust rattled the window pane, making both of them glance toward it instinctively. Jessica's eyes narrowed. "It's open," she said. Daniel frowned. "That's not possible. It's jammed shut most of the time." Jessica stepped closer. The window was indeed slightly raised, just enough to allow someone to slip through with effort. She looked down. Far below, the rocks glistened with seawater. "Not an easy escape route," she said. "No," Daniel agreed, "but it's an escape." Jessica turned back toward the room. Then whoever was here knew the layout and had reason to avoid us. Her gaze fell on the desk again. Something caught her attention. A small brass object, partially hidden beneath a stack of papers. She carefully moved the papers aside. It was a key, old-fashioned, intricately designed, with a symbol etched into its head, a lighthouse encircled by waves. The same symbol from the letter. Jessica picked it up gently, studying it. "This isn't ordinary," she said. Daniel stepped closer. "I've never seen that before." Jessica turned the key in her fingers. "Eleanor wanted this found." Daniel frowned. "Or someone didn't want it to be." Jessica glanced around the room again, her mind racing. "If someone came here after her death," she said, "they were looking for something specific. Documents, perhaps. Evidence." "And they didn't find it," Daniel added, nodding toward the key. "Otherwise they wouldn't have left this behind." "Unless," Jessica said slowly, "they didn't know what to look for." A faint sound interrupted them. A door creaking above. Both of them froze. "There's another level," Daniel whispered. "The lantern room." Jessica tightened her grip on the key. "Then that's where they are." Without hesitation, Daniel moved toward the staircase leading up again. Jessica followed, her heartbeat steady but quickening. The steps above were narrower, steep, the darkness thicker. As they climbed, the faint outline of the lantern room began to take shape, a circular chamber surrounded by glass panels. A shadow moved. Jessica saw it clearly this time. A figure. Before either of them could react, the shadow darted toward the opposite side. "Hey!" Daniel shouted, breaking into a run. They reached the top just in time to hear the crash of a door slamming open. Cold night air rushed in. Jessica hurried forward, but by the time she reached the doorway, the figure was already descending an Artakin Metallicheskaya ladder fixed to the outside of the lighthouse. She caught only a glimpse. Dark clothing, a hood, and speed. Daniel leaned out, gripping the frame. "Stop!" But the figure didn't look back. Within seconds, they had disappeared into the shadows below. Daniel exhaled sharply, frustration evident. They knew exactly how to get out. Jessica remained still, her eyes fixed on the darkness where the figure had vanished. "Yes," she said quietly. "And more importantly, they knew we were coming." She stepped back into the lantern room, her gaze sweeping across the space. The great lens stood at the center, silent and unmoving. But something about it felt significant, deliberate. Her fingers tightened around the key. "The truth is hidden in the light," she murmured again. This time, the words felt less like a clue and more like a warning. Jessica turned to Daniel, her expression resolute. "Whatever Eleanor discovered," she said, "it's still here. And someone is willing to risk everything to keep it buried." The lighthouse, once a beacon of guidance, now stood as something else entirely, a keeper of secrets. And Jessica Fletcher had just stepped directly into its shadow. Chapter 4. The Light Beneath the Truth. The lantern room felt colder after the intruder's escape, as if the brief presence of another person had disturbed something long dormant. Jessica Fletcher stepped fully inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim, bluish light filtering through the glass panels. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, its restless motion reflecting faintly against the curved panes. Daniel Pierce shut the door firmly behind them, his frustration still evident. "They had this planned," he muttered. "That ladder isn't obvious unless you know it's there." Jessica nodded absently, her attention fixed on the massive Fresnel lens at the center of the room. Even in darkness, it commanded attention. Rings of glass arranged with precise geometry, designed to magnify light into something powerful enough to guide ships miles away. Or perhaps, to conceal something just as effectively. She moved closer. "The truth is hidden in the light," she repeated softly. Daniel exhaled. "You really think that's literal?" Jessica didn't answer immediately. Instead, she circled the lens slowly, observing the base. The metal framework showed signs of wear, but something else caught her eye. Small scratches near one of the lower panels. Not random. Repeated. She knelt slightly, running her fingers along the marks. "These aren't from age," she said. "They're recent." Daniel crouched beside her. "Like someone's been opening it?" "Or trying to." Jessica reached into her coat pocket and withdrew the brass key they had found downstairs. The lighthouse symbol engraved on it seemed almost identical to the structure towering around them. She studied the base of the lens again, and there it was, a nearly invisible keyhole, cleverly concealed within the metal casing. "Well," Daniel said quietly, "that's not something you see every day." Jessica held the key up, comparing it. "Eleanor wanted this found," she said, "and she wanted it used." Daniel hesitated. "Or she wanted it hidden." Jessica gave a faint, knowing smile. "Eleanor didn't strike me as the type to leave things unfinished." Without further hesitation, she inserted the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft click echoed through the lantern room. Both of them tensed. Jessica turned the key slowly. There was resistance at first, then a mechanical shift deep within the structure. The base of the lens emitted a low grinding sound as a small panel slid open. Inside was a narrow compartment. Jessica leaned in carefully. Documents. Several neatly folded papers, protected within an oilskin wrapping. She removed them gently, placing them on a nearby surface. Daniel stepped closer, his curiosity overtaking his caution. "What did she hide?" he asked. Jessica unfolded the first sheet. Her expression changed immediately. "This isn't just personal notes," she said. "These are official records." Daniel frowned. "Records of what?" Jessica scanned the document. "Shipping logs, from 40 years ago," she said. "Dates, cargo descriptions, and signatures." She flipped to another page. "This one's different," she continued. "A report, classified, or at least it was meant to be." Daniel leaned in. "What does it say?" Jessica read silently for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "It describes an incident at sea," she said slowly. "A vessel that was reported lost during a storm." "That sounds normal enough," Daniel said. "Happens all the time around here." Jessica shook her head. "No," she said. "This ship wasn't just lost." She turned the paper so he could see. It was carrying something valuable, something that was never recovered. Daniel's expression darkened. "Smuggling?" he asked. "Possibly," Jessica said. "But what's more interesting is this." She pointed to a line near the bottom of the report. "An eyewitness account," she said, "from the lighthouse keeper at the time." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What did they see?" Jessica looked up at him. "They saw the ship," she said, "but they also saw another vessel nearby, one that was never officially recorded." Daniel straightened. "You're saying someone else was out there that night?" Jessica nodded. "And according to this," she added, tapping the page, "that second vessel signaled the lighthouse." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "Why would that matter?" Jessica's voice lowered. "Because the lighthouse signal was altered that night." A heavy silence settled between them. Daniel shook his head slowly. "That doesn't make sense. The light is automated, or it was even back then." Jessica gestured toward the lens. "Not entirely," she said. "It can be manually adjusted, redirected, dimmed." Daniel's gaze shifted toward the glass panels, as if imagining it. "You think someone changed the signal on purpose?" he asked. Jessica met his eyes. "I think someone used the lighthouse to mislead that ship," she said. "And if that's true, then what happened that night wasn't an accident." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "And Eleanor figured this out?" Jessica folded the documents carefully. "She didn't just figure it out," she said. "She found proof." A sudden realization crossed Daniel's face. "And that's why she was killed." Jessica didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked down at the remaining contents of the compartment. There was one more item, a photograph. She lifted it carefully. It showed two ships at sea, taken from a distance. One was clearly the vessel mentioned in the report. The other, partially obscured, but unmistakably present. No record, no name. Jessica studied it closely, then her eyes moved to something in the corner of the image. A figure, standing near the edge of the lighthouse platform, watching. Her breath slowed. This wasn't just about ships, she said quietly. Someone on land was involved. Daniel looked at her, tension returning. Someone who had access to the lighthouse, he said. Jessica nodded. And someone who made sure the truth stayed buried for 40 years. She folded the photograph and slipped it back with the documents. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, rattling the structure slightly. Daniel crossed his arms again, but this time it wasn't defensive. It was uneasy. "So what now?" he asked. Jessica glanced toward the door, her expression firm. "Now," she said, "we find out who else knows about this." Her grip tightened slightly on the documents. "Because whoever was in here tonight," she looked back at the open compartment, "wasn't just searching." Her eyes hardened. They were making sure nothing like this ever came to light again. And somewhere beyond the lighthouse walls, hidden in the quiet town below, someone was already watching them. Chapter 5. The Town That Remembers. Morning arrived in Lantern Cove with a pale, reluctant light that crept over the horizon and washed the town in muted grey. Jessica Fletcher stood by the window of her room at the inn, watching fishing boats drift slowly out to sea. From a distance, everything looked calm, orderly, predictable. But she knew better. The documents Eleanor Harrow had hidden now lay neatly arranged across the small writing desk behind her. Jessica had spent most of the night studying them, piecing together fragments of a story that someone had gone to great lengths to erase. A ship lost in a storm, a second vessel never recorded, a lighthouse signal deliberately altered, and a witness who had seen too much. Jessica turned from the window and picked up the photograph again. The image was grainy, taken from afar, but the shapes were unmistakable. 2 ships, 1 truth, and a lie that had endured for 40 years. A soft knock at the door broke her concentration. "It's open," she called. Daniel Pierce stepped inside, looking more tired than the night before. He closed the door behind him carefully, as though even walls in Lantern Cove might be listening. "I asked around," he said without preamble, quietly. Jessica gestured toward the chair. "And?" He sat, leaning forward. "People remember the storm. That much is clear. But when you start asking about details, about the ship, the lighthouse, anything official, they shut down." Jessica nodded thoughtfully. "Selective memory is often a sign of shared fear." Daniel exhaled. "Or shared guilt." Jessica didn't disagree. "I think it's time we spoke to someone who was here back then," she said. "Someone who might not be as willing to forget." Daniel hesitated. "There is one person," he admitted. "Thomas Calloway. He used to work at the harbour when all that happened. Still lives here, keeps mostly to himself." Jessica raised an eyebrow slightly. "And he's willing to talk?" Daniel gave a short, uncertain laugh. "That's the problem. He isn't." Jessica smiled faintly. "Fortunately, I've had some experience with reluctant witnesses." Thomas Calloway's house sat at the far end of town, perched slightly above the harbour. It was older than most of the buildings around it, with peeling paint and a porch that creaked underfoot. Daniel knocked firmly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, just enough to reveal a narrow, suspicious face framed by thinning grey hair. "What do you want?" the man asked sharply. Jessica stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Calloway, my name is Jessica Fletcher. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about the storm." "Not interested," he snapped, starting to close the door. Jessica spoke quickly. "About the night the lighthouse signal changed." The door stopped. Silence stretched between them. Slowly, Thomas Calloway opened it again, this time wider. His eyes moved from Jessica to Daniel, then back again. "You shouldn't be talking about that," he said in a low voice. Jessica met his gaze calmly. "And yet, here we are." He studied her for a long moment, as though weighing whether to trust her or fear her. Finally, he stepped aside. 5 minutes, he muttered. That's all you get. Inside, the house smelled faintly of salt and old wood. Papers and books were stacked in uneven piles, giving the impression of a man who lived more in the past than the present. Calloway remained standing. I remember the storm, he said. Everyone does. Worst one we'd had in years. Jessica nodded. And the ship that was lost? He hesitated. Officially, he said slowly, it ran aground. Couldn't see the coastline in the storm. Jessica held up the photograph. And unofficially? His eyes flicked to the image, and something shifted. You shouldn't have that, he said. That seems to be a common reaction, Jessica replied evenly.
Calloway ran a hand over his face.
There was another ship, he admitted quietly. We saw it from the harbor. Lights out there where there shouldn't have been any. Daniel leaned forward. Why wasn't it reported? Calloway gave a hollow laugh. Because no one wanted it reported, he said. Orders came down fast, real fast. From whom? Jessica asked. Calloway shook his head. Didn't matter. What mattered was keeping quiet. Jessica's voice remained steady. And the lighthouse? Calloway's expression tightened. The light was wrong, he said. I remember thinking it didn't look right. Not bright enough, not steady. Jessica exchanged a glance with Daniel. Altered, she said softly. Calloway nodded. And after the ship went down? She asked. There were boats out before dawn, he said. Not rescue boats, something else. They were searching for something. Jessica's mind raced. The cargo, she said. Calloway met her eyes. Whatever it was, he said, it was important enough to bury the truth. A heavy silence followed. Then Jessica asked the question that mattered most. And the lighthouse keeper? Calloway's face went pale. He disappeared, he said. Next thing we heard, there was a new keeper. No explanation, no questions. Daniel straightened. You're saying the original witness was silenced? Calloway didn't respond directly. Instead, he moved toward the door and opened it. You've had your 5 minutes, he said. Jessica stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Calloway, Eleanor Harrow was investigating this. Now she's dead. That stopped him. He turned back slowly. Then she made the same mistake, he said quietly. Jessica's eyes narrowed. What mistake? Calloway's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She believed the truth mattered more than the people hiding it. A chill settled in the room. Jessica held his gaze. And you don't? Calloway looked away. I believe, he said, that some truths don't stay buried without help. Jessica and Daniel stepped outside, the door closing firmly behind them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel exhaled. This is bigger than we thought. Jessica looked back toward the lighthouse in the distance, its silent form rising against the pale sky. Yes, she said quietly. And whoever is protecting that secret, her expression hardened, is still here. Chapter 6. Beneath the Surface. The harbor was alive with quiet activity when Jessica Fletcher and Daniel Pierce arrived later that afternoon. Nets were being hauled in, crates stacked, engines humming softly beneath the calls of seabirds circling overhead. It was the kind of scene that suggested routine, honest work, familiar rhythms. But Jessica had learned long ago that normalcy could be carefully constructed. She slowed her pace as they reached the edge of the docks, her eyes scanning the boats with deliberate care. If Calloway is right, she said, then whatever was lost that night didn't stay lost for long. Daniel nodded. He said they were searching before dawn. That means they knew exactly where to look. Or they were told, Jessica added. They walked further along the pier until Daniel stopped near a weathered fishing boat, tied securely to its post. This one belongs to Martin Hale, he said. He's been here longer than anyone, knows the water better than most. Jessica glanced at the vessel. It was sturdy, well-maintained, with signs of recent use. Is he likely to talk? She asked. Daniel gave a faint shrug. Depends on what you ask, and how much he thinks you already know. Jessica smiled slightly. That can be arranged. As if on cue, a man emerged from the cabin, wiping his hands on a cloth. He was older, broad and solidly built, with sharp eyes that missed very little. "You two look out of place," he said, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. Daniel stepped forward. "Martin, this is Jessica Fletcher. She's—" "I know who she is," Martin interrupted, his gaze settling on Jessica. "Word travels, even in a place like this." Jessica inclined her head politely. "Then I won't waste time explaining why I'm here." Martin studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the deck. "5 minutes," he said. Jessica exchanged a brief glance with Daniel. "That seems to be the local custom," she replied. Martin didn't smile. They stepped onto the boat, the wood creaking softly beneath their weight. The smell of salt and diesel lingered in the air. Jessica got straight to the point. "You were here 40 years ago," she said, "during the storm." Martin's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened slightly. "Lots of people were," he said. "Not all of them saw what you saw," Jessica replied. A pause. Then Martin leaned against the railing, folding his arms. "You've been talking to Calloway," he said. "Yes," Jessica admitted. "And he confirmed there was another vessel that night." Martin let out a slow breath. "He talks too much," he muttered. "Not nearly enough," Jessica countered gently. Martin's gaze shifted to the water. "There was a second ship," he said at last. "No lights, no signal, just there." Daniel stepped closer. "Why wasn't it reported?" Martin gave him a sideways glance. "Because some things aren't meant to be reported." Jessica held up the photograph. "And this?" she asked. "Was this meant to disappear too?" Martin stared at it longer this time. His jaw tightened. "Where did you get that?" he asked.
Eleanor Harrow left it behind, Jessica said, along with documents that suggest the lighthouse signal was altered. Martin looked away. "That's dangerous talk," he said quietly. Jessica's voice remained calm. "So is murder," she replied. That brought his eyes back to hers. "You think Eleanor was killed?" he said. "I think she got too close to something someone didn't want exposed," Jessica said. "And I think that something involves whatever was on that ship." Martin was silent for a long moment. Then he pushed himself off the railing and walked toward the cabin. Jessica and Daniel followed. Inside, the space was cramped but orderly. Charts were pinned to the walls, marked with routes and coordinates. Martin reached for one of them. "You want to know what they were looking for?" he said. Jessica nodded. He tapped a spot on the map, a location just beyond the cliffs. "Here," he said. "That's where the ship went down." Jessica studied the point carefully. "And the search boats?" "Same place," Martin said, "over and over again." Daniel frowned. "That's not how rescue works." "No," Martin agreed. "It's how recovery works." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "They knew exactly what they were trying to retrieve," she said. Martin nodded once. "And they got it," he added. A silence settled over the cabin. Jessica broke it. "What was it?" Martin hesitated. "Not cargo," he said finally. "Not in the usual sense. It was something smaller, contained." Jessica's mind raced. "A container?" she asked. Martin shook his head. "No," he said. "A case, metal, locked." Daniel crossed his arms. "And no one asked questions?" Martin gave a humorless smile. "People asked," he said. "They just didn't get answers." Jessica stepped closer. "Who was in charge of the operation?" she asked. Martin's expression hardened. "That's where you stop," he said. Jessica didn't back down. "Someone gave the orders," she said. "Someone arranged for the lighthouse signal to change. Someone made sure the truth disappeared." Martin met her gaze. "And someone is still making sure it stays that way," he said. Jessica held his eyes steadily. "Then they've already failed," she said. Martin frowned. "What makes you so sure?" Jessica reached into her coat and withdrew the brass key. "Because Eleanor didn't just hide the truth," she said. "She left a way to unlock it." Martin stared at the key, recognition dawning slowly.
"You've been in the lighthouse," he said. "Yes," Jessica replied. "And someone else was there too," Daniel added. Martin's expression darkened. "Then you don't have much time," he said. Jessica's voice remained composed. "Time for what?" Martin stepped past them, opening the cabin door. "Before whoever's behind this realizes how much you know," he said. Jessica and Daniel stepped back onto the deck, the wind picking up around them. Jessica looked once more at the marked location on the map, the place where the ship had gone down, the place where something had been recovered, and the place where the truth might still be hidden. She turned to Daniel, her expression focused. "We need to go out there," she said. Daniel nodded without hesitation. "Then we'd better move fast." Behind them, Martin Hale watched in silence, his face etched with concern. Because out at sea, beneath the surface, the past was waiting, and it wasn't finished yet.
Chapter 7. The Weight of the Deep. The boat cut steadily through the grey waters as the shoreline of Lantern Cove receded into a thin, distant line. Jessica Fletcher stood near the bow, her coat pulled tightly against the cold wind. The sea was calmer than it had been days before, but there was still a quiet tension in its surface, as if something beneath it resisted being disturbed. Daniel Pierce handled the controls with practiced focus, guiding the vessel toward the coordinates Martin Hale had marked. "We're close," he called over the hum of the engine. Jessica nodded, her gaze fixed ahead. "The place where the ship went down, and where they recovered whatever it was," Daniel added. Jessica didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into her coat and touched the folded photograph, as though grounding herself in the reality of what they were uncovering. A storm, a lie, a hidden recovery operation, and a secret that had claimed at least one life. "Slow down," she said. Daniel eased the throttle, and the boat gradually came to a halt, rocking gently with the motion of the waves. "This is it," he said. Jessica stepped closer, looking down into the water. It appeared dark and endless, its surface reflecting nothing but the muted sky above. "Hard to believe anything could remain hidden out there for so long," Daniel said. Jessica glanced at him. "Not if someone made sure no one looked too closely," she replied. Daniel moved toward a small storage compartment and pulled out a coiled rope with a weighted hook attached. "I don't have diving gear," he said, "but we might be able to snag something, if anything's still down there." Jessica watched as he prepared the line. "Even if the main object was recovered," she said, "there could be remnants. Evidence overlooked or deemed unimportant at the time." Daniel nodded. "Or something they didn't realize mattered." He swung the hook outward and cast it into the water. It disappeared beneath the surface with a quiet splash. They waited. The rope drifted slightly with the current as Daniel adjusted his grip, letting it sink deeper. Minutes passed in silence. Then, a sudden tension in the line. Daniel's grip tightened. "I've got something," he said. Jessica stepped closer as he began pulling the rope back in, hand over hand. The weight was uneven, dragging slightly before giving way. Whatever it wasn't small. The hook broke the surface first, followed by something dark and rusted, dripping seawater. Daniel hauled it over the side and dropped it onto the deck with a heavy clang. Jessica leaned in. It was a piece of metal, not large but distinct. A fragment of something manufactured, smooth edges, partially corroded, with faint markings still visible beneath the rust. Jessica crouched beside it, brushing away moisture with a cloth. "There's an engraving," she said. Daniel knelt beside her. "Can you make it out?" Jessica tilted the fragment toward the light. "Yes," she said slowly. "Part of a name." Daniel frowned. "The ship?" Jessica shook her head. "No," she said. "This is smaller, more precise." She traced the letters carefully. "Idian Systems." Daniel's expression shifted. "That's not a shipping company," he said. Jessica looked up at him. "No," she agreed. "It sounds more like a manufacturer." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Of what?" Jessica stood, still holding the fragment. "That's what we need to find out," she said.
A sudden noise broke through the moment, the distant sound of an engine. Both of them turned. Another boat. It was approaching fast. Daniel's expression hardened instantly. "That's not a fishing vessel," he said. Jessica narrowed her eyes. The boat was sleek, faster than anything they had seen in the harbor, and it was heading straight toward them. "They've found us," Daniel said. Jessica's voice remained steady. "Or they've been watching all along." The approaching boat slowed as it drew near, circling them at a cautious distance. Two figures stood on its deck. Even from afar, their posture was unmistakable, intentional, controlled, watching. Daniel lowered his voice. "What do we do?" Jessica didn't look away from the other boat. "We stay calm," she said, "and we don't reveal more than we have to." The other vessel stopped just within speaking distance. One of the figures stepped forward. A man, tall, composed, and entirely confident. "You're a long way from shore," he called out. Jessica stepped forward slightly. "So are you," she replied. A faint smile touched the man's face. "Curiosity can be dangerous out here," he said. Jessica held up the metal fragment. "So can secrets," she said. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. "That doesn't belong to you," he said. Jessica met his gaze without hesitation. "Neither did the truth you tried to bury," she replied. A silence stretched between the two boats, heavy with unspoken understanding. Daniel shifted slightly beside her, ready but waiting. The man studied them for a long moment. Then, calmly, "You should return to shore," he said, "while you still can." Jessica's grip on the fragment tightened. "Or what?" she asked. The man's smile returned, cool, controlled. "Or you may find that some things," he said, "are meant to stay at the bottom of the ocean." Without another word, he turned. The boat's engine roared to life. Within seconds, it sped away, disappearing across the water as quickly as it had arrived. Jessica remained still, watching until it was gone. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, "that was subtle." Jessica looked down at the fragment in her hand. "No," she said quietly, "that was a warning." She turned back toward the distant shoreline, her expression resolute. "And now we know one thing for certain." Daniel glanced at her. "What's that?" Jessica met his eyes. "Whoever is behind this," she said, "is no longer hiding." The sea stretched endlessly around them, but the mystery was closing in. And so was the danger. Chapter 8. The Light Revealed. By the time Jessica Fletcher and Daniel Pierce returned to Lantern Cove, the sky had darkened into a heavy, brooding grey. The encounter at sea lingered in both their minds, not just as a warning, but as confirmation. They were no longer chasing a ghost story. They were confronting something very real. Daniel secured the boat in silence, while Jessica stood on the dock, the rusted metal fragment still in her hand. The partially visible engraving, Idian Systems, had become the final thread connecting past and present. "Meridian Systems," Daniel said as he approached. "I've heard the name before. Not local." Jessica nodded. "No, and not maritime either. It sounds corporate, possibly industrial or technological." Daniel frowned. "So what would something like that be doing on a ship 40 years ago?" Jessica slipped the fragment carefully into her coat pocket. "That's the question," she said, "and I suspect the answer is what got Eleanor Harrow killed." They walked quickly through the quiet streets of Lantern Cove. The town felt different now, less like a sleepy coastal village and more like a place holding its breath. "Where to?" Daniel asked. Jessica didn't hesitate. "The lighthouse." The climb felt steeper this time, not because of the terrain, but because of what they now carried with them. Answers, fragments of truth, and the unmistakable sense that they were being watched. The lighthouse door stood exactly as they had left it. Jessica paused before entering. "If someone wanted to stop us," she said quietly, "this would be the place." Daniel nodded grimly. "Then let's not keep them waiting." Inside, the air was still and cold. The spiral staircase stretched upward into shadow, silent now, but but no less foreboding. They climbed quickly, their footsteps echoing against the stone walls. When they reached the lantern room, the answer was already waiting. The man from the boat stood near the great lens, his posture relaxed, as though he had been expecting them. "I was wondering how long it would take," he said calmly. Jessica stepped forward, unflinching. "Not long enough," she replied. Daniel moved slightly to the side, positioning himself carefully. The man's gaze shifted between them, then settled on Jessica. "You've uncovered more than most," he said. "That's impressive." Jessica's voice remained steady. "And you've hidden more than most," she said. "That's criminal." A faint smile appeared. "That depends on perspective." Jessica reached into her coat and removed the metal fragment, holding it up. "Meridian systems," she said. "Care to explain what they were doing out here 40 years ago?" For the first time, the man's expression changed, subtly, but unmistakably. Recognition. "Some things," he said, "were never meant to be explained." Jessica stepped closer. "A ship is deliberately misled. A second vessel retrieves a secured object. The only witness disappears. And decades later, someone starts asking questions and ends up dead." Her eyes locked onto his. "That's not a coincidence," she said. "That's a pattern." The man's composure remained, but his tone hardened slightly. "You're seeing fragments," he said, "not the whole picture." "Then fill it in," Jessica replied. A long pause followed. Then, unexpectedly, he sighed. "Meridian Systems," he said, "was involved in a government contract. Experimental technology. Highly sensitive." Daniel crossed his arms. "So you sank a ship to protect it?" The man shook his head. "The ship wasn't supposed to sink," he said. "It was supposed to disappear." Jessica's eyes narrowed. "Disappear?" she repeated.
"It was carrying a prototype," he continued. "Something that couldn't be traced, couldn't be intercepted. But there was a complication. Weather. Timing. The lighthouse signal was adjusted to redirect it toward a secondary recovery zone." Jessica felt the pieces click into place. "But something went wrong," she said. The man nodded once. "The storm intensified," he said. "The ship lost control. It struck the rocks before recovery could be completed." "And the second vessel?" Daniel asked. "Recovered what mattered," the man said, "and ensured nothing else remained." Jessica's voice sharpened. "Accept the truth." The man looked at her steadily. "The truth," he said, "would have caused far more damage than the loss itself." Jessica shook her head slightly. "That's the argument people always make," she said, "right before they decide they're above the law." Silence. Then she stepped closer to the lens. "Eleanor Harrow found your secret," she said, "and she hid the evidence where only someone willing to look closely would find it." The man's expression darkened. "She should have left it alone." "And now she's dead," Jessica said. Another pause. "I didn't kill her," he said. Jessica studied him carefully. "No," she said, "but someone working with you did." He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Daniel took a step forward. "This is over." The man glanced toward the door, calculating. But Jessica spoke again, calm, precise. "It is," she said, "because you've already said too much." In the distance, faint but unmistakable. Sirens. The man's composure finally cracked, just slightly. Jessica allowed herself a small, knowing look. "I contacted the authorities before we came here," she said. "After our encounter at sea, it seemed prudent." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You planned this?" Jessica gave a faint smile. "I prefer not to rely on luck." The man looked around the lantern room, his options narrowing. The sirens grew louder. "You've made a mistake," he said quietly. Jessica met his gaze. "No," she replied. "You did. 40 years ago." The door below slammed open.
Footsteps echoed up the staircase. Within moments, officers entered the lantern room, surrounding the man. He didn't resist. As he was led away, Jessica turned back to the great lens. The lighthouse stood silent once more. But this time, it wasn't hiding anything. Daniel exhaled. "So that's it," he said. 40 years of lies, finally over. Jessica looked out through the glass, toward the endless sea. "Yes," she said quietly. "The truth has a way of surfacing." She glanced down at the key still in her hand, the one Eleanor Harrow had left behind. A final message, a final act of courage. Jessica closed her fingers around it gently. "And sometimes," she added, "all it takes is someone willing to follow the light."
Thank you for spending this time with me and for stepping into tonight's mystery here on Buried Truths. It truly means so much to share these stories with listeners from all across the world. If this mystery kept you thinking, stirred your curiosity, or stayed with you after the final words, please take a moment to like this video. It helps these stories reach others who love thoughtful mysteries just as much as you do. And if you have not already, subscribe to Buried Truths and turn on notifications. New mysteries, hidden histories, and buried secrets await you here every single day. Let me know in the comments what you thought of tonight's story and where you are listening from. I read every comment and I love hearing from you. Until next time, stay curious and remember, some truths may be buried, but they never stay silent forever. Good night and see you in the next mystery.